Jimi Hendrix, a name that has become legendary in the rock music world, dubbed the guitar god of the 20th century. But behind the electrifying guitar riffs and the image of a genius artist lies a person with deep hidden wounds, dark secrets that the music industry and media have tried to conceal for decades. 1. A traumatic childhood. Not many people know that James Marshall Hendrix endured a painful childhood in Seattle. His mother, Lucille, was a heavy alcoholic who frequently abandoned the family to go with other men. His father, Al Hendrix, was a World War II veteran who returned with deep psychological scars. Jimi regularly witnessed scenes of domestic violence, screams in the middle of the night, and his mother's absence during the most important days of his life. When he was just 10 years old, Jimi had to witness his parents' divorce. 3 years later, news of his mother's death from cirrhosis completely devastated the young Jimi. These traumatic wounds were deeply imprinted on his soul, creating a person who was always seeking love and acceptance, but at the same time afraid of commitment and prone to self-destruction. Many in the industry later revealed that Jimi often had nightmares about his mother, and music was the only way he could soothe that pain. 2. Ed Chalpin's exploitative contract. One of the darkest truths that few people know about is the story of the slave contract that Jimi signed with producer Ed Chalpin in 1965. At that time, Jimi was just an unknown musician struggling to make a living in New York. Chalpin exploited Jimi's lack of legal knowledge to sign an extremely disadvantageous contract for just $1 and a promise to record. This contract later became Jimi's lifelong nightmare. Even when he became a world superstar, Chalpin continued to sue, claiming ownership of recordings and demanding huge royalties. This not only caused Jimi to lose a large portion of his income, but also caused extreme psychological stress. Mike Jeffrey, Jimi's manager, had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to resolve lawsuits with Chalpin. But this toxic relationship never really ended. Until the day Jimi died, Chalpin was still suing him. Many believe that this legal pressure contributed to Hendrix's deteriorating mental health in his final months. 3. The toxic relationship with Mike Jeffrey. Mike Jeffrey, Jimi's manager, was dubbed one of the most terrifying figures in rock history. A former MI6 agent, Jeffrey turned artist management into a game of ruthless control and exploitation. Jeffrey controlled every aspect of Jimi's life, from finances to performance schedules. He forced Jimi to perform constantly, sometimes up to 300 nights a year, regardless of the artist's physical and mental condition. People close to Jimi later revealed that Jeffrey had embezzled millions of dollars from Jimi's earnings through shell companies and offshore accounts. More frightening is that Jeffrey was believed to have deliberately kept Jimi addicted to drugs to make him easier to control. When Jimi began to sober up and wanted to terminate the contract, Jeffrey threatened and even committed violent acts. Many of Jimi's friends said he often spoke about his fear of his manager and the feeling of being trapped with no way out. Strangely, just 2 years after Jimi passed away, Mike Jeffrey also died in a mysterious plane crash in France in 1973. Some conspiracy theories suggest this was not an accident, but related to the dark secrets Jeffrey was keeping. 4. Violence against women. This is perhaps the most shocking and carefully concealed truth about Jimi Hendrix. Behind the image of a peace-loving artist was a man with violent tendencies toward women, especially when intoxicated or using drugs. Kathy Etchingham, Jimmy's long-term girlfriend from 1966 to 1969, once had to be hospitalized after being beaten by Jimmy in a jealous rage. Although she later forgave him and wrote a memoir about their relationship, the fact that domestic violence occurred cannot be denied. Devin Wilson, another of Jimmy's lovers, was also attacked by him. On one occasion, he pushed her out of a high-rise window. Fortunately, she only suffered minor injuries. Witnesses said Jimmy could become extremely violent when jealous or suspicious of a girlfriend's infidelity. Sadly, these behaviors were often justified by he couldn't control himself on drugs or it was his past that made him that way. But the truth is that violence is always a choice. And the music industry's cover-up of these behaviors contributed to creating a culture of silence around violence against women in rock and roll. 5. Addiction and collapse. Jimi Hendrix didn't just experiment with drugs, as many people often say euphemistically. He was a heavy addict of LSD, cocaine, heroin, and alcohol. In his final months, his addiction had become so overwhelming that it seriously affected his ability to perform and create. Musician friends called him a functional user, meaning he could still perform despite being constantly high. But the reality was much harsher. There were nights when Jimmy couldn't remember lyrics, played guitar incorrectly, or even fell on stage from being too intoxicated. Eric Burdon, a member of the Animals and Jimmy's close friend, later revealed that in the final months, Jimmy had completely lost his way. He would often call friends at 3, 4 in the morning, saying nonsensical things or crying about wanting to die. The tragic thing is that everyone around him knew Jimmy needed help, but no one really did anything for fear of losing their golden goose. They let him continue spiraling into self-destruction as long as he could still stand on stage and make money for them. 6. The mysterious death and conspiracy theories. On September 18, 1970, Jimi Hendrix was found dead at a hotel in London. The official cause was asphyxiation from vomit after an overdose of sleeping pills. But the details surrounding his death have always been controversial. Monica Danneman, the girlfriend who was with Jimmy that night, told many different versions of what happened. In some statements, she said Jimmy was still alive when the ambulance arrived. In other versions, she said he had stopped breathing. These contradictions have led many to be suspicious. James Tappywright, an assistant to Mike Jeffrey, in a 2009 book, claimed that Jeffrey had confessed to him about helping Jimmy die. According to Wright, Jeffrey said, "I had to do it. Jimmy was about to fire me, and I would lose millions of dollars." Although there is no forensic evidence to authenticate this, many believe Jimmy did not die by accident. Some doctors later suggested that the amount of wine in his lungs was unusually high, suggesting that someone may have forced him to drink while unconscious. The truth may never be fully revealed, but these doubts have cast a dark shadow over the death of one of the greatest musicians in history. 7. Contested legacy and fractured family. After Jimi died, a decades-long legal battle erupted over his estate. Al Hendrix, Jimi's father, had to fight for years to regain control of his son's work from greedy managers and lawyers. This battle divided the Hendrix family. Jani Hendrix, Al's adopted daughter, not Jimi's child, eventually gained control of the estate through Experience Hendrix LLC. But this created conflict with other family members, especially Jimi's siblings and the illegitimate children he left behind. There are at least 3 people claiming to be Jimi's children, but most have been denied inheritance rights. One of them, James Henrik Daniel Sundquist, had to fight legally for years to prove he was Jimi's son, despite having DNA test confirmation.